or that we do deserve. We deserve punishment for our sin. We are going to get, he's a holy God, right? And he's a God of justice. And so we do deserve that. We do deserve the punishment, but he also gives us the blessings that we don't deserve, and that is grace. Mix up mercy and grace. And so let's recap, okay? What is mercy? Can somebody tell me what mercy is? Yes. Oh, Wyatt. Forgiveness. Yes. Okay. So when we don't get what we do deserve, that's mercy. That's forgiveness. God's forgiveness. Grace. Can somebody tell me what grace is? Eileen. When you do get something you don't deserve. So those blessings and salvation. So, okay, kids, raise your hand if God gives you second chances. Oh yeah. Raise your hand if your parents give you second chances. You have your hand if you can give second chances. Oh my gosh, that's so good. Okay, yeah. So let me end with a little bit of scripture, okay? Ephesians 2:4-5. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love, can go back and sit with your parents and grandparents. How many?
Well, if I knew that money was involved in the children's moment, I might have sat there myself on the front row. I just want to tell you how blessed we are to have Erin on our ministry staff here at Cornerstone. She is a huge blessing to us, has really advanced our children's ministries forward. She works tirelessly. This is not her only job. She's a wife, a mother. She works for the Hemet Unified School District, and she does a fantastic job. We had a great VBS this year, so we're so thankful for her. So I want to encourage you to take a copy of the scriptures this morning and find your way to Matthew chapter 5. We have been in a series this summer entitled The Upside Down Kingdom, because in Matthew chapter 5, 6, 7, the gospel writer presents to us a picture of God's kingdom that is so different from the world's kingdom. It's unique, it's antithetical, it's opposite. And this sermon, called the Sermon on the Mount, really can be summarized in the first few verses, which are called the Beatitudes. And so Matthew chapter 5 is the place that we find these beautiful attitudes. That's where we get the word Beatitudes, because the word beautiful comes from a Latin root where you beatus. So I would like to read for us at the beginning all the way through verse 7, where we will stop today. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. He opened his mouth and began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." When Victor Hugo wrote his masterful novel Les Miserables in 1862, it was an instant classic. The protagonist of the story is the ex-convict Jean Valjean, who through a single act of mercy by the hands of a priest becomes an entirely different man. He goes on to adopt a young girl, Cosette, an illegitimate child of a prostitute, and raises her as his own daughter. And the antagonist of the story is a man named Inspector Javert, whose passion in life is to find Valjean, believing that criminals like him can never change. and need to be punished. Well, near the end of the story, Valjean has the opportunity to kill Javert. And one of Hugo's purposes is to show that those who show no mercy are indeed miserable. I remember years ago watching the film adaptation of the novel and being so moved in my spirit by the stark comparison between these two characters, one having great mercy and the other being totally unmerciful. And in some strange way, God used that to cause me to reflect upon how God has treated me in my life. I can't be sure, but perhaps Hugo was giving us a fictional picture of Jesus' words here in Matthew 5:7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And just a little review just to kind of catch us up. We started with the first one, blessed are the poor in spirit. Those are people who recognize their total spiritual bankruptcy before God, who understand that they bring nothing to God that merits His grace, His mercy, His kindness, His salvation, that they see the emptiness of their own souls. And that leads to the next one, blessed are those who mourn, because when you see yourself in response to who God is, when you see a meekness towards others. The third one is blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And I thank Pastor Eric for presenting that message last Sunday. There comes in this person a deep hungering and thirst to be made right before God. And of course, we know that that can only happen through the finished work of Jesus on the cross. But you have this hunger for God, this hunger to be in His presence, this thirst for God in a dry and weary land, like the psalmist says. And that leads us this morning to the next one. And we want to just note that the first four Beatitudes are all inner qualities. They're inner attitudes. They're things that happen on the inside of us, in our spirit, in our soul. But from this point forward, the merciful and then the rest of them are the ways that we now treat others. And so we see that our vertical relationship with God affects the horizontal relationship with others, because as we cultivate numbers 1 through 4 through the work of the Holy Spirit in our life, we are then able to manifest those inward attitudes outwardly in our world and in our relationships. And so here, very simply, Jesus is saying to us that to be a citizen of His upside-down kingdom is to be one that shows mercy. One who has your heart, which will be next Sunday, and then peacemakers, being conciliatory, and then being able to endure the worst kinds of harassment and persecution. Now, as you go through the Bible, this concept of mercy is incredibly important. One of the verses that maybe some of you would be familiar with, I memorized as a kid, but He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. In Hosea chapter 6, God says through the prophet that He desires mercy and not sacrifice. Interesting. The knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. You go over to the New Testament in Luke, it says, love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For He Himself is kind to ungrateful and evil men. You know, sometimes when I see in our world people who hate God, people who raise and rail against Christians and Christianity, I just think about how God has been good to them despite their hatred of Him. And then that last part of that Luke passage says, be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? We are called to be holy as God is holy. We're also called to be merciful as God is merciful. We are called to reflect the bright light of His mercy onto the darkness of our world. Throughout the New Testament epistles, you will find a very common theme grace, mercy. When we see how merciful the Lord has been to us, we just sang about it, his mercy is what? More than we can show mercy to others. So I'm going to cover 4 points this morning. I know your outline, your bulletin, I think says 3, but I added one, and so you'll see that at the end. But here is the first one, the meaning of mercy. Let's just talk about this for a moment. Erin was kind of getting into some of this, and she was absolutely on target. There is a distinction between mercy and grace, but there's also a blending of the two. Now, in Roman culture, mercy was not a positive quality at all. One philosopher, Roman philosopher, said this: mercy was a disease of the soul, a sign of weakness, not strength. Because the Romans glorified courage and justice and individuality, and this was all the result of their theology, really actually mythology. They had this pantheon of gods and goddesses. Maybe you studied them at some point in your academic career. And if you read a lot of those mythological stories, you recognize that the concept of retribution, payback, go ahead, make my day kind of attitude, is glorified in Roman and Greek mythology. And so you were kind of rooting for one god to get their pound of flesh by retaliating against another. It's true, I did some research on this. When a child was born in the Roman world, the father had the right of patria potestas. And they would let the child, most often a female, die from exposure. Do you know what? It was the Christians in the Roman Empire, as Christianity began to spread, who distinguished themselves from the paganism of their world by being the people who would go rescue those babies and care for them and adopt them into their own families. I talked about our ministry in supporting birth choice. That's why it's so important, because it was Christians who first did this. But in the Roman world, the father could do this or could do this. Same with a Roman citizen who had slaves in his household. He could end their life with a thumbs down without any legal recourse whatsoever. So let's talk about the words here. Now, the Greek word in particular is the word elio in this particular verse, Matthew 5:7, or elios. Elio is the verb form of mercy, and it refers to those who show mercy, those who act or move in some way to alleviate the distress of those in suffering. In fact, we get another word from this. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but we get our English word benefactor from it, one who shows mercy. Now, there's a really interesting word play in the linguistics here. I am no scholar in Greek by any means, but in ancient Greek, ilios, mercy, and ilion, olive oil, were almost indistinguishable. And early church fathers frequently noted this phonetic connection in the Greek language that God's mercy acts like olive oil. How many of you cook with olive oil? It's supposed to be very good for you, right? It's the best oil, they say, right? As long as you don't heat it up too hot, right? But I want you to think about this. In the ancient Mediterranean world, olive oil was the universal medicine. You didn't pull out the triple antibiotic ointment. You pulled out a flask of olive oil. And maybe you say, oh, I know that phrase. My grandmother used to say it all the time. Lord have mercy. Kyrie eleison. But what they were asking, because of the wordplay, the closeness of Elios and Elion, mercy and olive oil, is they were asking God to pour the soothing olive oil of his grace and love upon broken hearts and spiritual wounds. Isn't that beautiful? You say, well, Pastor, I'm a little suspect of that connection. And I'm not absolutely certain we could make it, but when you go to the parable of the Good Samaritan, do you remember Luke chapter 10? The Samaritan finds the beaten, dying man on the road, and it says he was moved with compassion. That is the word elio, mercy. And immediately, what did he do? He poured oil, Elion, into his wounds to soothe and heal them. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Mercy is a beautiful thing. Just like shower others with mercy, and it's like rainwater upon the unborn child in the womb. And so you see the deeper connection of this word. We just say mercy, but in the Old Testament, the Hebrew, and the New Testament, the Greek, we see more deeper instructions. So now we want to talk about the practice of mercy, because we understand it in its basic form. First of all, mercy is more than a feeling. I think sometimes we mistakenly believe that you're merciful when you feel sad for someone else. That is wrong. That is incorrect. Now, that's where it may start, because when we see others who are suffering in our world, when we see others who are suffering on the streets of our community, when we see people in our family who are injuring themselves through addictions and through behaviors that violate God's will for their lives, and they're experiencing the pain of that, they're suffering, we should feel something. In fact, that is one of the dangers of cable network news that is constantly being dispensed to us through our mobile devices, on television, is we get desensitized to the suffering in our world. Because it's just always there. Yeah, someone got killed, 20 people got killed over here, murdered over here, and we just listen, oh, well, it's just part of the daily news side. I think that is terrible. It desensitizes us. I remember as a 19-year-old kid on a short-term mission trip to Manila, Philippines. And as part of our exposure experience on this mission trip, they took us to a place in Manila called Smoky Mountain. What is Smoky Mountain? Is it a volcano? No, it's not. It is the city dump. And the reason it's called Smoky Mountain is because people live in the city dump. They were trying to make a subsistence living out of collecting cans and bottles. They had these cardboard and metal scrap lean-to homes. They were trying to drink water, and I just remember going through there. The stench was unbelievable. There was open sewers, and I thought to myself, all my parents raised me in a home and provided for all of my needs. And these people are living in a dump. And my heart was moved. See, it starts with being moved to action is not the essence of mercy. James' instruction here is so critical in James chapter 2. He says, "Brethren, God did not choose the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom. Did not God choose the poor of the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Is it not the rich who oppress you and personally drag you into court?" That is the wrong set of verses, but it actually is related. Because in James chapter 2, it talks about meeting the needs of those. It's actually 15 and 16. I better get it right. I'm going to get it right, okay? James chapter 2 says, "Go in peace, be warmed and be filled, and yet you do not give them what is necessary for their body." What use is that? 5 and 6 are good. India and then the Indian loads of relief supplies. They are ready at loads of relief supplies. They are ready at any given moment to respond to the deep human needs and suffering in our world. That is mercy. That is mercy. Chapter 18. Would you just turn there for a moment? Turn over to Matthew chapter 18. There is a chapter 18. Would you just turn there for a moment? Turn over to Matthew chapter 18. There is a story in Matthew 18 that is a story that we need to take note of, because Jesus is a story that we need to take note of because Jesus is responding to a question from Peter. Remember, Peter comes up to Jesus. You know, Peter just He was one of those guys who just said what was on his mind. He never thought about what he said. We have some people in our government that do that. They just speak, they just think, they don't think about it. It doesn't go through their brain before it comes out of their mouth. They just think, they don't think about it. It doesn't go through their brain before it comes out of their mouth. They just, blah, blah. And Peter just comes with an attitude there, right? I've got some people like these disciples right next to me that are sinning against me a lot. What am I supposed to do about that? These disciples right next to me that are sinning against me a lot. What am I supposed to do about that?